Hi everyone, video number 2. I want to talk to you about the first of 2 major assignments for our study of homegoing. And the first is the annotated bibliography. The annotated bibliography I'm going to just talk about in this video, and then I'll make another one that talks about essay 2. They're connected. The bibliography and the essay are connected. So let's talk first about the annotated bibliography. You may have done an annotated bibliography in any of your other classes, maybe even in English 100. Some high school instructors I know use one. Sometimes you do a bibliography in a history or a sociology class. The process is basically the same. The idea here is that, actually, let me backtrack. If you watched the Trevor Noah interview with Jessie, then you heard her talk about how she was very intentional that every chapter she included something that was actually happening in history. And so homegoing is as much a study of the characters and of the family line as it is about what was happening in the United States, what was happening in Africa, and really kind of watching the characters as history unfolds. So kind of hold that. Also hold the fact that in English 230, one of the requirements of the course is for you to conduct research. And he researched beyond Wikipedia, beyond history.com, but to actually dive into the databases and do some research. And that is why the annotated bibliography is designed the way that it is. Because we have this kind of gift from Jessie of these historical foundations that are happening throughout the whole book, and we have this requirement that we have to meet. And so rather than having you write an entire essay about the history, I'm asking you to conduct or to create an annotated bibliography. So what you're going to do is, and you may not be able to even choose what history you want to write about until after you have finished the book. That's fine. You may already know right now, oh, I'm so interested in this particular thing, and you know that that's what you want to focus your bibliography about. Great, that's fine. Your goal is to learn more about one of the historical elements, I guess you could say, that Jessie brings into homegoing. You're not choosing for example, if you are thinking about Willie's chapter, right? Willie's chapter talks about 4 or 5 different historical trends. Even though you are choosing Willie's chapter, you would only choose one historical element. So you're not addressing everything that happens historically. You're choosing one historical element. Maybe it's the independence of Ghana that we see in Yah's chapter. Maybe it's the introduction of the cocoa plants in Abina's chapter, right? Whatever it is, you're choosing one element and you're really going to dive into trying to learn about that history. And that's the purpose of the annotated bibliography. I feel like is my word of the day today. I keep saying that. Your annotated bibliography is comprised of a few different parts. Obviously, you're going to give an MLA citation. You're going to somehow explain how you know that the source is credible. Like, why should we believe this particular person and what they have to say about this particular history, right? That's part of your job as the researcher and the writer, is to help establish credibility for someone like me, the reader, right? And then to kind of break down and share what information and what history you're learning and how that might better help us understand what's happening in the chapter. Right? That's ultimately the leap that you're going to be taking. It's not just that, oh, I'm learning about, cocoa plantations in Ghana, and isn't that interesting? It's more about, okay, so how does that help us understand what Jessie is setting up in the homegoing chapter, right? So that's the leap that we're ultimately going to be making. So here is your actual task. Don't worry, there's an example here. Here's the assignment snapshot, right? So you're choosing one chapter of homegoing, researching one historical element from that chapter. And then your ultimate job here is to create 3 different annotations. So 3 annotations about the one historical element in the one chapter. There's no word count. There's no where was I going to go with that? There's no word count. You do need to use MLA. You need 3 different sources, and this is due by Friday the 15th, with a grace period of Saturday night of the 16th. So again, this is one of the requirements of English 230. So you need to avoid Wikipedia and history.com. And really, you should avoid Google. Now, I know that Google is our go-to for all things research. We type in, tell me about cocoa plantations in Ghana, and we will end up with information. But a lot of that is commercialized. And what I really want you to try and challenge yourself to do is to just go to the LMC library. You don't necessarily have to use EBSCO. You don't have to use any of those databases. There are lots of other databases that are available to you that will give you better information than I think you can find online. And when I say online, I mean, I'm talking about Google. If you do decide for sure you want to use Google, then try Google Scholar. That will at least give you a little bit of a closer experience than the library will. But I really do think that the library has some amazing resources, especially when it comes to this assignment. And I did this assignment. So I'll show you my example. I will be today creating the annotated bibliography module in the class. So that way everything that you need for the module will be in one place. Again, just to kind of make it easy, you don't have to hunt all over for everything. The other thing too is that as you are researching, I want you to kind of think about how your research can build so that you're not just getting more information that's the same, right? Because when we're researching, we don't necessarily want all the resources to tell us the same information over and over and over again. We kind of have to alter our question a little bit or alter what we're looking for a little bit so that we can get another angle or we can get a little bit deeper into the topic. And I'll show you what I'm talking about with my example here. So as I mentioned in the video, the first video from this morning, when I first read Homegoing, the chapter that really hit me hard was H's chapter. I don't know what it was, but something about his character and his treatment in the mines and just the convict leasing in general. I really didn't know a lot about that. And so that's what I chose to do for the annotated bibliography. So I did 1 annotation. Keep in mind, you're going to be doing 3. So here's my 1 annotation as an example. I did use the LMC library. So I hopped into the LMC library and I looked at, they have an African American database. It's not a data. That's not what it's, the African American experience. Sorry, there's a Latino experience, African American experience. I think there's an Asian American experience. I chose the African American experience. And I looked up convict leasing. Now, I don't have a whole lot of foundational knowledge about convict leasing. So my first annotation for me had to be about, what is this all about, right? That was my goal from my very first annotation. And so, I read about convict leasing, and here is my annotation. This is about how long your annotation should be. Again, there's not a word count, but if you're turning something in that is only 2 or 3 sentences, that's not going to provide a lot of information, and it's also not necessarily going to help you when you go to write essay number 2, which you'll have to read about or watch the next video. So a few things I want to highlight in terms of what I'm looking for in your annotations. Remember how I said you need to establish credibility. That I do right here. Right? The author is Volney Reiser. So here's my credibility. Here's how I'm telling you as the reader, this is why we can at least see this author, this writer as credible. He's a history professor at the University of West Virginia. There's my establishing of credibility, right? Basically, the article is an overview of convict leasing. So what you're basically doing is summarizing what is in the article that you read, and you can add details you think that might help explain a little bit of the history of the practice. You can use quoted material for anything that you think is interesting. You can, towards the end, and this is kind of what I do too, make connections to what we see happening in homegoing, right? So Let me just read through this, right? Written by history professor R. Volney Reiser at the University of West Virginia. This article provides a general overview of the practice known as convict leasing. Although in 1865 the 13th Amendment banned slavery, it allowed for the use of convict labor, which basically was a continuation of slavery disguised as prison labor. With prisons overflowing, state and county officials could lease convicts for industrial and agricultural purposes, thereby reducing prison overflows and collecting revenues. The leasing system worked for men and women, regardless of race. However, African Americans were the primary targets of the leasing system. The justice system was also rigged to help support the leasing system because it benefited local industries and economies. So at this point, all I'm doing is summarizing what's in the article. I don't need to cite it because in the annotated bibliography, it's assumed that you are going to be summarizing the article, okay? Here, I continue. Reiser writes that, quote, prison sentences grew longer in direct proportion to market demand, and minor offenses became grounds enough for a sentence to work in the camps. Many African American inmates found themselves condemned to camps by way of corrupt prosecutions. I included that because in H's chapter, there's a discussion about what H should say in terms of why he's in jail. And you learn a little bit about what other people have done and how corrupt the system was. And so that's why I included that quote there. It continues, prisoners were kept in terrible conditions. Business owners had no reason to treat prisoners with any dignity. Since the prisons were always full, prisoners were not in short supply. Interestingly, the article discusses the practice in Alabama, which is where the character H was located and where he would have been leased. And so for me, what was important was I wanted to make direct connections to what was happening with H. Because again, the author, Ya Jesse, she talks about, I am situating this character in this historical movement. And so for me, I wanted to try to do that. I would encourage you to do the same. Excuse me. If you notice things that are happening in what you're researching and you're like, oh my gosh, this is an absolute parallel to what's happening in the book, great, talk about it in your annotated bibliography. You know, that's kind of what I'm doing here. Especially here towards the end, right? The article talked about how much state revenue jumped in particular years in Alabama, and that character H would have been part of that jump. And so that's what I included in here. Now, that's basically what the annotation looks like, right? Now, if I were going to do a second one, I wouldn't look for convict leasing again because I know a little bit of that background now. But maybe I'm curious about what the work was like in the mines because H was in the mines. Or maybe I would look at what happened once they were released, which we also see in H's story. So that's what I'm talking about when I mean that your annotation shouldn't just be three of the same thing, convict leasing, right? It's all about convict leasing, but you're kind of narrowing that each time in order to get maybe a little bit closer to where the character is, right? And so that's your task of the annotated bibliography. It is due we've got 2 weeks after break, so it's due at the end of that 2-week period. So next week is spring break. The week after that, the week of April 4th, that's week 10. So I've got all kinds of conferences available if you want to meet and talk about it. The following week is the week of April 11th. Your annotated bibliography is due at the end of that week. So if you have questions about it, please don't hesitate to let me know. Take a look at the next video about essay number 2, which will talk about how the two assignments are connected. And again, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to let me know.